What is going on, y'all? Thank you for checking out another edition of the Liberty Cast. This week, we're going to examine the left's gun control agenda again. We'll get into some debate analysis and some of the things that really stuck out to me. And voter fraud is real, folks, and now it's being sanctioned by the courts. So we'll get into that, as well as the tech tyrants' blatant efforts to sway this election. We'll get into all of that and more right after this. Again, folks, thanks for tuning in. If you're listening, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get podcast content. And if you're watching on Rumble, please subscribe there so you never miss an episode. Now, I need to clarify something that I said last week. We are still on YouTube. We're not moving away from them completely. We're just not using them as our primary video platform. So if for some reason you prefer YouTube to Rumble, please subscribe there as well. All right, let's hit it. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Regular listeners and watchers of this show know that I have been super critical of the Harris-Biden ticket and vocal about what their administration would mean for our gun rights. And in a word, it would be a disaster. Not only because they want to relieve us, basically, of our constitutional rights, but for the reasons that they give for wanting to do it just don't make any sense. One of the latest pieces of evidence that gun control, or taking guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens, doesn't work is in Oakland. I mean, you could pick a leftist-run city, and most of what I'm about to say would be true. But for purposes of this discussion, we'll stick with Oaktown. Now, there has been a spike in violent crime in the city of Oakland, and pretty much like across the country, really. But Oakland is currently sitting at 80 homicides this year. There were 58 all of last year, and there's still 2 months to go in 2020, and we know how 2020 is shaping up. But Biggie, how is this possible? California has the strictest gun laws in the country. They have in place every leftist disarmament wish list item there is. Universal background checks, waiting periods. They banned assault weapons, and I'm using their language, but we all know that there is no such thing, and many handguns are banned as well. And we went over how incoherent that is last week. So they should be free of violent gun crime, right? There's no way Oakland can be on track to nearly double its homicide number from last year. Yet here we are. Why? Because it doesn't work. And they know it doesn't work. And it doesn't matter to them that it doesn't work because, as I've said often, to the point of it being a broken record, it's not about safety. It's about control. You know, it's almost like the criminals don't care about your stupid gun control. That's not entirely true. They do care to the extent that it leaves the citizens of the city vulnerable and at their mercy. Now, I came across this piece in the Daily Messenger by Mark Obi, or Obi. It's a rebuttal to an earlier piece by Len Lisenby, who basically said what I've been saying, that Harris and Biden are coming for your guns. But Mr. Obi, or Obi, and if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, please forgive me, but he contends that that is a lie.
So to gun owners out there who say, well, a Biden administration means they're going to come for my guns.
Bingo.
I do believe that we need to do buybacks, and I'll tell you why. First of all, let's be clear about what assault weapons are. They have been designed to kill a lot of human beings quickly. They are weapons of war with no place on the streets of a civil society.
I want to make something clear. I'm going to guarantee you this is not last year's scene of this guy. You're going to take care of the gun problem with me. You're going to be the one that leads this effort. I'm counting on you.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47.
Albie writes, it's one thing to argue that you disagree with their policy goals, and even to argue that, in your opinion, those policies would violate the Constitution. It's another to baldly lie about what they have said and lie in a way that only fuels irrational fears about impending doom if the election doesn't go your way. I think I just proved with that side that he's completely wrong. There's nothing irrational about being afraid that they're coming for our guns. But he goes on in the piece to argue a point that Lisenby never made. He said that it's simply a lie to say that any and all restrictions on guns are unconstitutional. He's wrong on two fronts, because Lisenby actually never made that assertion in his piece, and I read it several times to make sure that I didn't miss it. And unless we're talking about keeping them out of the hands of criminals and the mentally ill, any and all other restrictions are unconstitutional, shall not be infringed. Both pieces will be up in the show notes, so I encourage you to read them both and let me know if I missed something or I'm completely off base regarding Mr. Obi's piece, but I don't think so. One of the most despicable things that Obama did during his presidency, and there was one hell of a top 10 list, but one of the most contemptible things he did was sign into law the NICS Improvement Amendments Act of 2007, or NIAA. Gun owners were supposed to be ecstatic about this because it required states to establish a relief from disabilities program, which was supposed to provide a mechanism by which people could be removed from the FBI's NICS system if they were placed on that system in error. Which sounds fantastic, but it's still exceedingly difficult to get off that list once you're on it. But hidden in the bill was a provision where the ATF could offer taxpayer money to bribe states into reporting as many people as possible to the NICS system as prohibited persons. As a result, the VA has been reporting people who have been issued a disability rating that required assigning them a fiduciary manager, which is basically someone who helps them with understanding and getting access to their VA benefits. There was no adjudication, no evaluation by a mental health professional, nothing. Just a bureaucrat with a pen and a clipboard who says, you need help. And so the Obama administration arbitrarily decided that even though you served your country with honor, since you now need some help, you are not fit to be allowed to protect yourself or your family with a firearm. Shall not be infringed. Now, this move proved their contempt for the military and for our veterans and for the Second Amendment. Now, to rectify this, the GOA and the GOF have filed a petition with the VA to change this rule and restore the constitutional rights of over 250,000 veterans. So here's hoping that under the Trump administration, that happens. And finally, real quick, before we move on to some other topics that I want to get to, you all know who Mark Giffords is, right? He's the husband of Gabby Giffords, who was shot by a lunatic who should not have had a gun. But miraculously, after having been shot in the head, she recovered. But since then, she and her husband, Mark, have been staunch anti-gunners, and they established Giffords, a foundation which has become one of the premier anti-gun organizations in the country. But Mark's one of those FUDs who claims to be a gun owner and supporter of the Second Amendment. But his actions since his wife's attack are anything but pro-Second Amendment. They believe that California is the model for the entire country, and he's running for state Senate, U.S. Senate in Arizona against Martha McSally. Not going to get into that race. I'm not going to talk about that or his Hitler costume. Yeah, you can look that up yourself. But anyway, I called him a FUD because, well, Giffords, the organization that he co-founded with his wife, has launched a spin-off group called Gun Owners for Safety. This is a group of FUDs who advocate for infringing on your rights to keep people safe. They're just trying a softer sell for the same old gun control nonsense. Now, I don't know if you all know what a FUD is, but a FUD is someone who claims to be in favor of the Second Amendment, but believes that there should be restrictions on it aside from violent criminals and the mentally ill. They operate under this mistaken belief that the Second Amendment is about hunting and that the government should be able to impose limits and restrictions on what you can and can't own for the sake of public safety. Anyway, let's move on to the 800-pound silverback in the room and talk about the debate. I think everyone knows by now and can agree that President Trump figuratively whooped Biden's ass that night. But before we get into that and the debate itself, let's just say for the record, I was legit impressed with how fairly Ms. Walker handled this debate. Chris Wallace said in his post-debate analysis that he was jealous that he didn't get to moderate this debate. Well, be a better moderator. Anyway, I know she's a leftist, and she did run interference for Biden on occasion, and she interrupted Trump more than Biden, but overall, she did a pretty good job. Now, it could be that the bar was so low after Wallace and Guthrie that all she had to do was not drool on herself, and she would do a better job. Who knows? But that said, Biden came off as the Grim Reaper that night.
We're about to go into a dark winter, and he has no clear plan, and there's no prospect that there's going to be a vaccine available for the majority of the American people before the middle of next year.
Way to paint a bleak picture of the future, Joe. And by contrast, Trump came off as very cheerful and optimistic about the future. But anyway, there were a couple of other moments where Biden was either completely misleading or flat out lying. Right out of the gate on the Chinese virus discussion, he said that Trump was late in restricting travel from China and that 40 countries did it before he did. It's kind of true, but he did it within days of those countries. And Samantha Kiernan, a research associate for the Council on Foreign Relations, said that while the United States was not one of the first countries to impose restrictions against travel from China, nor was it late to do so relative to the actions of others. Rather, the United States acted around the same time that many other countries did. When the discussion got around to healthcare, though, Biden really lost it. Just listen to this.
Thirdly, the idea that I want to eliminate private insurance. The reason why I had such a fight with 20 candidates for the nomination was I support private insurance. That's why not one single person with private insurance would lose their insurance under my plan, nor did they under Obamacare.
Wow. One of the biggest stories in the aftermath of the passing of Obamacare was that nearly as many people who got insured under that disaster of a plan lost their insurance. I know people who lost their insurance as a result of that. Companies that provided insurance were scrambling to try to find more affordable options. And here's the thing. So many people who were watching that only pay attention to politics in the month leading up to the election. And they will hear that and believe every word of it because the news sources that they follow have told them that Trump is a liar and the worst person in the world. Yet here we have Biden telling a bunch of whoppers, like this one.
All right, let me allow Vice President Biden to respond.
I never said I oppose fracking.
You said it on tape.
I did. Show the tape. Put it on your website.
I'll put it on.
Put it on the website. The fact of the matter is he's flat lying.
Would you rule out banning fracking?
I do rule out banning fracking because the answer, we need other industries to transition to get to ultimately a complete zero emissions by 2025. It's a transition to that.
I mean, come on. Really, Joe? You and Kamala are on record saying the exact opposite.
No new fracking. And by the way, not another new coal plant will be built. I want you to just take a look, okay? You don't have to agree. But I want you to look in my eyes. I guarantee you, we're going to end fossil fuel.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
What is it with these leftists? Do they genuinely forget that they once said what they said just a few months ago? Or do they think that we're stupid and we don't remember? I think it's the former, because I've read stories where the writers actually claim that by bringing that up, Trump is the one perpetuating the lie. Now, when it comes to perpetuating lies, the left is the world heavyweight champion of perpetuating lies. I know that's not exactly analogous, but you get the idea. Here's another one that may not be obvious to most, but again, if you're paying attention, you knew this was a lie as soon as you heard it.
These 500 plus kids came with parents. They separated them at the border to make it a disincentive to come to begin with. And guess what? They cannot, it's not coyotes didn't bring them over, their parents were with them. They got separated from their parents. And it makes us a laughing stock and violates every notion of who we are as a nation.
Let me ask you a follow-up
Kristen,
question.
they did it. We changed the policy.
Your response
they
to that?
They did it. We changed.
Did not
They built the
separate
cages.
they,
who built the cages, Joe?
Let's talk about what
Who
we're
built the
talking about.
cages,
Let's
Joe?
talk about what we're talking about. What happened? Parents were ripped, their kids were ripped from their arms and separated. And now they cannot find over 500 of sets of those parents, and those kids are alone. Nowhere to go. Nowhere to go. It's criminal.
Really? Well, a spokesman for DHS said in a statement that DHS has taken every step to facilitate the reunification of these families where the parents wanted such reunification to occur. The simple fact is this: after contact has been made with the parents to reunite them with their children, many parents have refused. Many parents, families simply refuse to reunite with these kids. So suggesting that the Trump administration is basically kidnapping children and deporting the parents is just preposterous. Not to mention that it's been well documented that coyotes and cartels and other entities are crossing the border with these children, and most of the so-called families that are being separated at the border are not in any way related. I cannot believe that people are still trying to say that there is no evidence of voter fraud. They conflate mail-in ballots, universal mail-in ballots, with absentee ballots when they are not remotely the same thing. We've actually never had mail-in voting on this scale in this country. But we see instances every day where ballots get discovered in dumpsters or thrown away in parking lots or found in ditches or in cabs. And they almost always favor one party. And I don't think I need to tell you which party that is that benefits from this fraud, but it's the Democrats. Just last week, or maybe it was the week before, I told you about how the Supreme Court ruled that Pennsylvania could count ballots that arrived up to 3 days after the deadline. Life isn't supposed to work that way. We learned early on that if you miss a deadline, that's it. You're done. School, work, anniversary, wife's birthday. That's it. Game over. Thanks for playing. But with that ruling, they're just treating us like children in the hopes that there really is some sort of red mirage and that the late votes that get counted favor Biden, and they will. And if that wasn't ridiculous enough, now the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has ruled that mail-in ballots can't be rejected if the signatures on the mail-in ballots don't match the signatures on file for that voter. How does that make any sense? All the articles I've read haven't offered any explanation as to why this is a good idea. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand, I acknowledge that there are circumstances under which the signature not matching is legitimate. Injuries, accidents that result in the loss of the use of your limbs or the complete loss of your extremities. If something like that happens, get it taken care of before you vote. But I understand that, and that's fine. And I also know that signatures can change over time. I know mine has. It's been pretty much the same for the past 15 or 20 years now, but this ruling didn't make any of those distinctions. The judges just said that since there's no specific law on the book stating that they can be rejected on that basis, they cannot be rejected on that basis. It seems like common sense that if the signature doesn't match, it shouldn't count. How is this difficult? They're not even trying to make it difficult for fraudsters to stuff the ballot box. This is court-sanctioned voter fraud. Ballots can now be up to 3 days late with a forged signature and be counted. I got into it again with someone over abortion, and this is a topic I never really thought would be one that generated as much discussion as it has for me. Of course, someone posted some blue check Twitterati's, I believe it was Robert Reich, who said something stupid about abortion where he compared it to the choice of wearing a mask to a woman's right to choose what she does with her own body. So again, my question, does the body of the baby not count? And I got one response, which was basically my position a few years back. If a woman tells me she's going to kill the baby, I don't have any right to say anything to the contrary. But of course, some third wave feminists chimed in and went full feminazi. And I'm quoting now, it's not a baby until it's born. At the time you can still get an elective abortion, it's effing goo, a zygote. It doesn't even qualify as a fetus, which demonstrates her ignorance on the subject. But at 5 weeks, the heart starts to beat. And in some states, a woman can get an abortion at up to 24 weeks. And then she took it to the next level, calling me an aging incel, and that I could F off for telling a woman who will die without an abortion. Again, ignorant. That she must end her life. And that I can F off for forcing a woman to carry a non-viable fetus, which she claims is the only other situation where a late-term abortion is performed, which, again, she's ignorant. But that I can F off for forcing a woman to carry a non-viable fetus to term just to humor my tender sensibilities. Again, this woman has no clue what she's talking about. So there's no medical condition that a mother could suffer from that requires the baby to die rather than being delivered, and doctors all over the place have said this.
She said on the floor of the House or Senate the other day in Virginia was that if a woman was in full labor, could that child be killed right before he emerged from the birth canal through probably an injection into the heart, which is how doctors perform late-term abortions? And her answer was yes. And bills like this in Virginia and in other states would allow a baby just on the verge of being born to be killed.
Walk us through what happens to a baby who is aborted up to the moment of birth as the New York law allows.
Well, the way babies are normally aborted in the third trimester, especially in the late third trimester, is that an injection is done through the woman's uterus and into the baby's heart, and the baby's heart is stopped. Once the baby has ceased living, then the woman's labor is induced, and the baby is delivered either whole or in parts, depending on the technique that they want to use.
In regards to performing an abortion to save a woman's life, an abortion by definition wants to kill the fetus. If a woman has, for example, early premature rupture of membranes and she has an infection, or she has a malignant hypertension that poses a threat to her life, her obstetrician can deliver that baby. So she does not need to go down the street to an abortionist in order to be cared for. Her doctor can deliver her.
It is never going to be medically necessary to kill a baby in order to save the life of a mother.
And given all the instances where a mother chooses to deliver a baby that everyone has told her was non-viable, and then that baby ended up thriving, I want someone to define non-viable. Babies have been known to survive after as few as 18 weeks in a mother's womb. So again, define non-viable. And given medical advances happening all the time, there's no way you can tell me that if a mother and doctor were motivated, a 16-week fetus couldn't survive outside the womb. Now, I'm speculating at this point. I'm not a doctor, but do you really think that it's unreasonable to at least try if there's a medical complication that threatens the mother's life? Seems reasonable to me, right? So this person and anyone who believes that it's tender sensibilities that drive my belief that preborn babies should be protected, I own that. I will own that and own it proudly. And rather than match that woman's ugliness, I will just say that I pray for you that you come around to the same understanding that I did. It's pretty well established at this point that the tech tyrants, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and to a lesser extent Instagram, even though I know that they are suppressing my posts and that they are rejecting my wife's ads for a Carry Girl. So head over to carrygirlgear.com and do some shopping. Shameless wife promotion, yes, I know. Sue me. Anyway, Twitter is still actively suppressing the Hunter Biden story and others. The New York Post, the oldest continuously published newspaper in the country, founded by Alexander Hamilton in 1801, is still locked out of their Twitter account. Now you can look at the stats of your tweets, and if you have a Facebook or Instagram page, you can look at the stats of your posts and see how many people they're reaching relative to your followers. And you can see the trends based on what subjects you post about and what gets suppressed and what they allow to a wider distribution. Now on Instagram, I had a couple of memes reach over 2,000 people. But the one I posted about Hunter Biden reached 123. But the most obvious example in recent memory is obviously Hunter Biden, which really isn't that recent since Michelle Malkin and others wrote about everything that's going on right now that's coming to light back in 2014. But another instance of Twitter's tech tyranny arose when they suppressed the Detroit News endorsement of Republican Senate candidate John James. If you tried to share that story from the link on the Detroit News, Twitter covered it with a message saying that headlines don't tell the full story. What's the full story? They endorsed John James. John James is black. So isn't that racist? Or is suppressing voices only racist when it's Black Lives Matter or some other organization? I can't keep up. But it's not just social media. Google is actively suppressing searches for conservative content, and news organizations are presenting the news from a very leftist perspective. And a friend of mine who is a Biden supporter actually had no idea about the comment that he made to Charlemagne that if you're not from him, you ain't black, or that he has a history of making racist comments, or that he supported and called a friend and eulogized Robert KKK Byrd, the Grand Cyclops of the Ku Klux Klan. It's one thing to have knowledge of a candidate and make a calculation that you can live with some of the things that they may have said and done and still support them. But if you don't know all the information, if you never hear the full story, how can you make an informed decision? And that's what these tech tyrants are counting on. And Google and YouTube, they're notorious for deplatforming conservative content creators, demonetizing conservative content, and hiding content from searches. It's ridiculous. Now, I know that there are alternatives to Twitter and YouTube, like Parler and Rumble, both of which I'm on, so go ahead and follow us over there. But they don't yet have the same reach or following that Twitter and YouTube and Facebook have. And I don't think there is or can ever really be a viable alternative to Facebook with 2.7 billion active users. So given that reality, what can be done about it? Now, I'm of the opinion that government regulation is almost never the answer. Although in this case, I really don't see a way around it. Some are advocating for the government breaking up Google under antitrust laws. I think we need to at least start with removing the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act protections, which defines these entities as platforms rather than publishers, where these companies, well, when these companies make decisions to suppress stories based on ideology or whatever the basis, when they make that decision, they by definition are now publishers and should be held to the same standard to which other publishers like the New York Post and the Washington Post and the New York Times. There's a piece by Philippe Lemoyne in The Federalist, and please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, but and this piece is from a couple of years ago, so it's old, and he says some things that I don't necessarily agree with in it, but it's every bit as relevant now as it was then, and he makes a point which is parallel to one that I've made on this show in the past. And my point was that the tech tyrants have a combined yearly revenue larger than the GDP of some small countries. And that's a lot of power to wield. And one of the points he makes is that these companies are in effect monopolies. And even though they are not state actors, their suppression of content and information based on a particular ideology is just as bad as if it had been done by the government. And when these companies want to suppress a story or promote a particular point of view, they have the power to do it, just like the government. And that's a scary state of affairs that we are now caught right in the middle of. We're going to get you out of here with a few quick hits. First, Joy Reid actually said in her post-debate commentary that Black Lives Matter never advocated for violence. Let me back up. During the debate, President Trump mentioned Black Lives Matter and their pigs in a blanket, fry 'em like bacon chant. And she said this in response.
Pigs in a blanket line. There was an offshoot, separate group of people. Nobody knows who they are. I know a whole lot of people in Black Lives Matter, a whole lot of people who started it and who were leaders in it. Not a single person knows who those people were that started that chant. They were never connected to the march. There is absolutely zero evidence that Black Lives Matter has ever pushed for anything violent to happen to police. Black Lives Matter is about one thing. Stop killing black people just because you pulled them over for a parking violation or a moving violation. Just stop killing black people. They have never advocated violence against police. For him to traffic that again tonight was not only desperate, it was not only desperate, it was also stupid because he also wants black men to vote for him.
Okay, we've played that sound before, so I'll stipulate for the record that wasn't Black Lives Matter. It was, but I'll give you that one, Joy. So what about this?
Everybody out in the streets, hooping and hollering, running around. Cool, more power to you. But guess what? While we got the country by its balls, we're going to shove legislation right down its throat.
So, obviously, people watch what you say in that video that you want to now shove legislation down people's throats now that you have everyone's attention. And you also have said that violence is sometimes necessary in these situations. What exactly is it that you hope to achieve through violence?
If this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down this system and replace it All right, and I could be speaking figuratively.
Okay.
I could be speaking literally. It's a matter of interpretation.
I'm at the point where I'm ready to put these police in the grave. I'm at the point where I want to burn the White House down. The same way I police up in New York, I cops up here in D.C. The same way I bust police in the head in New York, I bust police in the head in D.C.
Either she's woefully uninformed or she's lying to you. Chelsea Handler's a racist. I don't talk about her often, but when I do, it's because she said something completely asinine. And this time is no exception. Now, you probably have all heard that 50 Cent has announced his support for Trump after seeing how much he's going to have to pay in taxes under a Biden administration. Well, apparently she used to date 50 Cent and had this to say.
You heard about my ex-boyfriend, right? 50 Cent and his support of Donald Trump.
Yeah, what's going on between you? I saw your tweets and I go, wait, what's happening? Because you said he was your favorite ex-boyfriend and then what does he do? He's supporting Trump?
He says he doesn't want to pay 62% of taxes, which, by the way, isn't a plan of Joe Biden's. That's a lie. So he doesn't want to pay 62% of taxes because he doesn't want to go from being 50 cent to 20 cent. And I had to remind him that he was a black person, so he can't vote for Donald Trump, and that he shouldn't be influencing an entire swath of people who may listen to him because he's worried about his own personal pocketbook. So I haven't heard back from him yet, but I am willing to, seal the deal in more ways than one if he changes his mind and publicly denounces Donald Trump. I might be willing to go for another spin, if you know what I'm talking about.
So just like Biden, she's a racist who thinks that all black people need to vote a certain way, and if we don't, then we're not black. And she's wrong about the tax plan. Biden is not advocating for a 62% federal tax rate yet, but between the proposed federal tax rate under his plan and all the taxes he's going to have to pay in New York, his effective tax rate would be 62%. She's an idiot. And we haven't talked about this one in a while, but I guess Representative Ocasio-Cortez didn't think she was getting enough attention, so she decided to bitch about the president calling her by her initials during the debate. AOC is a name given to me by community and the people. Y'all can call me AOC. Government colleagues referring to each other in a public or professional context, aka who don't know me like that, should refer to their peers as Congresswoman, Representative, etc. Basic respect 101. Okay, first off, those are your initials. Second, if you're insisting that people use your title, that's your insecurity talking. That's evidence of your vacuousness and the fact that you have nothing of substance to contribute to the conversation. So sit down, AOC. Anyway, folks, that's our show. I will try to do better next time. But thank you all for watching and or listening. If you're watching on Rumble, please take a second to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. If you're listening on audio only, check us out on Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, whichever podcast platform you prefer. And please subscribe there and leave us a 5-star review. I would really appreciate that. Our website is thelibertycast.net. Go to the podcast page and you'll find all the latest podcasts. We're also on therightway.site. And of course, we're on social media, Twitter, Parler, Instagram, Facebook, at The Liberty Cast on all 4 of those platforms as well. But again, thank you all for taking the time to spend with me, whether you're watching or listening. And until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.